So this is Titan Quest Ragnarok. It was a welcome surprise by THQ Nordic last year. I think it came out in November. Since then I've done a lot of up-to-date testing, so I thought I'd do an informative walkthrough of the campaign, and also showcase one of the new builds in the game, which is the Dragon Hunter. So let's get started. I'm going to create a character here. You'll notice there's this new Accomplished Hero button down at the bottom. You can use that to start out right at level 40 at Act 5, which is a higher level than I would normally be. You can also use that for muling, since you start out with lots of money, full bag slots. You can use it for testing, all sorts of things. We're going to start out at level 1. So you'll notice pretty quickly that I'm playing with the game sped up. This is played live, but using a third-party piece of software to speed up the game beyond very fast. Your first task in Act 1 is to get a really nice ranged weapon, and I do recommend a ranged weapon, and get to level 2, kill the shaman, and continue on. You can also opt to use this torch. They lay around on the bridge starting out. They're pretty decent, they do some flat damage, but they're kind of slow, and they're a melee weapon, so you'll take quite a bit of damage that's unnecessary. You could just use a ranged weapon, you'll save a lot of potions that way, and you don't have money for potions at the start. You'll see I'm not taking a direct route to the shaman. I'm kind of opting to clear around a little bit more. And you should do that too if you want to hit level 2 before you fight the shaman. And level 2 is pretty important because it'll give you the tools you need to beat him easily. It's not that he's hard, but if you're just starting out, any edge in the beginning of the game is good. You'll notice when I fight these boars that I move away right when they're attacking. So, like a lot of other offline aRPGs, a melee hit isn't resolved unless you're in melee range when the animation's finished. That means you can step away just before a boar, for instance, hits you. It's easier to do if you're just fighting one mob, but it's really useful against things like bosses and saving your life and saving potions. It's a bit harder to do later on as you go, just because in Epic and Legendary, enemies get a total speed boost, and so that means they attack and run faster. It's a little bit hard to break away like this, so you tend to devolve into stutter stepping, which is fine, and I do that too. It's just not as recommended a technique to use against a single target. Since I'm playing a Dragon Hunter, I really don't have a good option for level 2, but luckily I got this regen shrine. It's the purple shrine down here. Most of the time you'll get one, hopefully you did. And if you did, you can just lure the shaman to the regen shrine and then attack him with your ranged weapon. You don't have to dodge any abilities, he has 0 chance of killing you, and you're done. So I'll be leveling this character using an ability called Magical Charge. I'll get my first bit of it at level 3, and it's a pretty effective weapon. Or ability, but I can't use a staff as a weapon if I want to use the rune weapon ability, which is required in order to proc my magical charge. So I'll be getting rid of my staff pretty quickly, but right now I'm opting to buy potions instead, just because since I'm going to use magical charge is a retaliate sort of ability. That means I'm not only banking on getting hit, but I'm relying on getting hit, and because of that, I need more potions than normal. You can clear as much as you want here. I tend to stick to the roads. I find that any experience that I don't get by not full clearing, I could just make up for later at my favorite farming spots. But if you're just starting out, I mean, clear to your heart's content here. I might meander a bit, but for the most part, I stick to the roads. This is meant more to be like a podcasty commentary. It's a longer video, as you can see, so you can put it in the background. But if you're watching also, you'll see me go through the direct route, the most optimal route that I usually take. This first cave you encounter sometimes has a shrine to the northwest. In this case, I got really lucky and got a battle shrine. So when you take that, you don't want to waste any time clearing around the shrine. You want to run directly into this quest cave. These trappers have a lot of life, they deal a lot of damage. And so you'll find that the shrine will barely last long enough to clear this cave. So that's exactly what you want to do. Sometimes that shrine isn't there, that's okay, you just got to take this cave a little bit slower. You'll see my shrine buff just fell off there.
A human face.
So in terms of items, I'm looking for recovery gear, which is this piece of gear I just found. It gives flat recovery, it's never more powerful than it is at the beginning of the game. It doesn't scale very well later on. In Act 1, it's extremely overpowered. So you're going to want recovery gear, you know, on your shield, on your helmet, your boots, your gloves, and your chest piece. Doesn't matter if you get resist gear, doesn't matter if you get health gear, you want recovery over everything. The only caveat to that is if you're playing maybe a summoner, then you might want to look for Beastmaster's gear instead. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm switching to a melee setup. Again, I need to proc my rune weapon in order to get magical charge, and you can see it here, it's pretty devastating. It reminds me a lot of Ring of Fire, which is probably the most overpowered leveling ability in the game, in that it kind of just kills everything around you. And it kills them fast. I think Ring of Fire is still better. Since this is a retaliate sort of ability, it doesn't work against ranged attacks. Just like in Grim Dawn, you can only retaliate against melee attacks. You don't want to forget this guy running away. He's in trouble, sort of runs away, ends up in more trouble. There's usually one of those sort of hidden rescue quests in every act, at least Acts 1, 2, and 3. You might as well do them. But they can be hard to find, especially the Act 2 one. About these harpies, you're going to want to kill them wherever you find them. They drop a special charm called Pristine Plumage. It stacks up to 5, you need 5 of them to get a full charm. But it's very effective. You don't have to worry about resists in Act 1, like I said, not normal mode. But you really want to get poison resist as soon as you can. It's always useful throughout the whole game, and that's exactly what Pristine Plumage gives you. It's not the most common charm, but in case you can't find it readily enough from the harpies, I do provide a farming spot, at least my favorite farming spot, later on in this act. The other charm you want to keep an eye out for in Act 1 is Demon's Blood. It's probably the most important resist charm in the game, especially since, if you haven't played since Anniversary Edition, in Anniversary they made it so Vitality Resistance gets a penalty in later difficulties, Epic and Legendary, in addition to bleed damage, but Vitality is enormously important in this game. And that's what Demon's Blood gives you. You put it on your rings and your amulets, Pristine Plumage goes on your armor slots. I'm going to try in this video to farm Pristine Plumage, at least get a full one. I don't know about Demon's Blood. I have written down that I want to do some testing with Shadow Maul. He's a monster that was added in Anniversary Edition. I'm going to kill these harpies here. And in this quest cave, to find that guy's necklace, this is where you encounter your first demons. Notice they have the demon tag. That means they can drop Demon's Blood. Now these guys rarely ever do, the Yuris, and they rarely ever drop it in other acts they appear in either. So I don't recommend farming this cave. The only time you need Vitality Res in Act 1 is against the Archlemos later on, before Athens. So just clear it once and get that dowry. Don't forget to turn it in. This guy gets super excited when you give it to him.
The necklace!
Yeah. You're welcome. So if you want to know some effective abilities to farm with or to level with, Ring of Fire, like I said, is the best one. This ruin I'm coming up on, for instance, I only clear it if I'm a Ring of Fire character. That's because there's just so many archers and so many mages, it would be ineffective for this character to farm it. And you'll find, based on your character, that there's certain enemy types that just aren't worth fighting. So for this character, if there's too many archers, I opt to not fight them. If you're a squall character, that's an amazing leveling ability. You're pretty good against any enemy type. If you're nature, then wolves is the best way to farm and to level throughout Act 1, 2, well, actually the whole game except for maybe Typhon in Act 3. And of course static charge for any rune character. So you're not going to have a lot of money by this point, but if you have about 12,000 gold by Sparta, then you can start looking for recovery gear. It's the only gear really worth buying. I mean, I'll keep my slots empty because I'm lazy unless I get recovery gear.
If I look, what?
Didn't find any here in Sparta, but that's okay. There's places to farm it later on. But when items drop and they block together the way they do, and there's filters for loot in this game, but I mean, yellow items drop in bulk, and yellow items are so good that you don't want to filter those out. So just look for those key affixes. Like I said, the recovery is a suffix, so items can roll a prefix, they can roll a suffix, and they can roll both. Sometimes they don't roll any. But if it's a yellow item, it'll have at least one affix. You're looking for recovery at this point. Or like I said, if you're a summoner, Beast Mastery. Or Beast Collars, I think it's called. Don't forget Hippias, he's over in the east. We're going to do every quest, we're not going to skip any. So if you're watching along, you'll see where they are. If you're following through a commentary and playing in the background, then you should be able to pick up through audio cues where these things are. So Nessus is pretty easy as a boss. He hits really hard, but all he has are melee attacks. So if you can't sustain against him, and you probably can't, even with recovery gear, just run away. Just break away for a little bit, re-engage when your potion is off cooldown. You can see I lured him away. He has an ability where he calls adds, but if you take him out of his little nook, he can't really use that ability. At least he can, but the adds won't engage with you. You also saw that before I fought him, he had an aura around his feet. That's an important thing you want to look for. That means he was marked as a quest monster. Now, any monster that's a quest monster has a higher chance of spawning with a unique item on him. And just like in Grim Dawn, if a unique item is on a monster, when you kill that monster, he'll drop the unique item. So you can utilize that on Nessus to farm shields, chest pieces, weapons. It's really good to farm the Boar Hunter shield, which is a very overpowered shield in the beginning of the game. It counters a pretty difficult boss in Act 4 on normal mode and epic mode, and is useful other places too. So if you have a decent character, go ahead and farm Nessus. I don't farm bosses usually. I normally farm more than I will in this video, because I want this video to be short-ish. But I don't usually farm Nessus, unless I really want a Boar Hunter shield. There's going to be other monsters later on that have that aura, and we will utilize farming, mostly for money in Act 2 and Act 3, those enemies. But once you complete the quest, if you encounter Nessus again after turning in that quest, which we haven't yet, we'll turn it in later, then you'll find that he doesn't have that aura anymore, and he's not as effective to grind. He has normal odds. So these Mycenaean ruins, I'm not going to clear them either. Too many archers like before. If you're playing Ring of Fire, or at this point you have Squall, then you can clear it. So around here there's a sort of side passage that'll take you to a spider-infested area. There's a cave over there. And there's a new enemy added in Anniversary Edition called Boar Snatcher. Now he only appears on Epic mode, but I'm not going to go over there on normal mode at all. So I'm going to skip that area completely. Just be aware that somewhere around here, before the Nymph Cave, which we'll encounter later, is where you encounter Boar Snatcher. If you find a shrine that gives some sort of offense, like Frost Shrine, Mastery, Battle Standard, then go ahead and clear more than you normally would. It's worth it for the extra experience.
The water.
I used to sell plows and scythes to farmers, but since the monsters, It's been swords and shields, greaves and spears.
So get acquainted with this guy. He's going to sell a lot of your recovery gear. This is where you really want to stock up. So before you leave the village of Tegea, make sure you've got a decent amount of recovery gear. And you're going to get that by farming this cave to the west. This is the Nymph Cave, and what's great about it is there are quest monsters in there. Like I mentioned before, you're going to get a higher yield of green items and yellow items that you can farm for money. And after every grind, you're going to turn that stuff in to the vendor, get some money, check his supply, see if you can find recovery gear, and move on. What else is great about this cave is it's got these majestic chests. A bunch of potential spawn locations. It's not always a majestic chest, but you know, there's a lot of chances for there being a majestic chest, or at least a quality chest. Even the bone piles at this point in the game are very useful. They tend to drop potions. So if you're, if you've done this grind a few times, you'll tend to come out of it potion positive, meaning that you'll find more potions than you use. So that's kind of nifty. You do have to be careful though, because some of these mobs are pretty deadly. In particular, these death spinners. You can see I was baiting out a few projectiles. They have two different attacks. Here's a piece of recovery gear. Always look out for that. One of them is a poison bomb. The other one is a yellowish projectile. It's faster, and that will root you. So you don't want to just run into the center of the pack because you'll get rooted, and then all three of the death spinners will each stack their poison bombs on you, and you will die. That will kill you. You likely don't have pristine plumage at this point. Definitely not a full one. So that poison's going to kill you. I'm going to do the grind one more time. As you can see, it spits us right back at the village. Now this is what's called a fountain farm. Remember that because we're going to be using a lot of fountain farms, and you will too the more you play this game.
But since the monsters, it's been swords and shields, greaves and spears.
Sorry, I'll try not to talk when the NPC is. But a fountain farm is basically, it's something you have to do when you're at that resurrection fountain. So a resurrection fountain, if you die, you'll spawn back at the latest resurrection fountain you visited, and also if you enter a new game, you will spawn back at the resurrection fountain. But once you encounter the next one down the line, you can't go back to the one you're at before. That means if you want to farm this cave, for instance, which is very far away from a teleportation pad, I mean, behind us was Sparta, in front of us is Megara, which is past the coast area. So you really have to farm this while you're here. But what's convenient is all the loot you found in the spider cave on one grind, you turn it in right away, and then you go right back to the cave. It's a nice grind. And you tend to walk away with it with a full set of recovery gear. You probably noticed that's exactly what I was looking for with that guy. I don't pick up the quest, mainly because my brain goes on autopilot and I will turn the quest in, and then I'll ruin the grind because I'll no longer get the really nice spawns at the end of the cave. They'll still be there, they just won't have the aura around them. This grind is especially useful if you're playing a strength-based character, like a Conqueror for instance, and I highly recommend you play a Conqueror. I would be playing a Conqueror now, but I wanted to showcase one of the Rune Master builds. That's because you can actually wear this Arachnos gear that they're dropping, and that stuff can roll recovery. So conceivably you'd walk away from this grind as a strength-based character with a full set of recovery Arachnos gear. And if you do it enough, you might even find the green versions, the monster infrequent versions, I mean. We'll talk about what makes a green different than a monster infrequent later.
You can't carry.
And you might also run away with a Deathweaver leg tip, which is probably the best weapon you can find in Act 1. So I think this will be the last time we run into this cave. Normally I'd grind it a little bit more, get a full set of recovery gear, but for the sake of the video we're going to move on. Again, you don't want to miss this quest just because it does reward health. It's permanent bonus. Health is good.
Yes, stranger?
So I really recommend you play a Conqueror just because they have a very nice progression. So I don't play inheritance playthroughs where I you know, give hand-me-downs to my characters and deck them out in these overpowered items. I prefer playing the game as just a vanilla playthrough. See how you can counter the game with what you find. And I think a Conqueror just suits that very well. You'll find if you go to forums and things that they kind of have a pejorative reputation. You know, if you don't want to do something fun, go ahead and play a Conqueror. You know, it's kind of a sissy thing to do or whatever. They're a lot of fun. They're fun to play, they're fun to build, you're going to have tons of options. Act 5, you would think Act 5 would have looked back on the rest of the game and said, you know what, there's a shortage of intellect and dexterity gear, so let's add some of that stuff. No, Act 5 went ahead and said, there's a lot of strength gear, so let's add some more. So you're in good hands if you're playing a strength-based build in this game. So remember this fountain right here. This is going to be the second fountain grind that we're going to do. You remember earlier I said that there's a farming path for pristine plumage. This is it. This is my place for farming it. The only other option for you in Act 1 is Knossos much later on. But again, you want that poison res as early as you can get. It's not needed for Act 1. There's no needed resists in Act 1. But the best ones would be poison, possibly vitality just for Lemos, and cold. Cold just for the shotgun ability that the Ichthyans do later on. But you can see this is a very nice area. There's a lot of different spawn points that can potentially be a harpy. A spawn point is shared between harpies and these little crows. So sometimes you'll get more crows than harpies, sometimes you'll get more harpies than crows, but there's usually going to be a lot of harpies. Anyway, I'm going to farm this spot for a while, at least until I get a full set of pristine plumage. So I'll see you in a couple minutes. Alright, I've done a few grinds. I think I got a full set of pristine plumage. I didn't obsessively do it. Some characters you'll want to. Since I'm going to be a hunter, I get a special ability that gives me poison res right off the bat. It's kind of nice. So I'm going to continue on. This is the first coast area you encounter. I think these might also be the first Ichthyans you encounter. These guys are present throughout the game. If at this point you're not dealing a lot of damage, it might be worth skipping this whole area, especially because of these drowned sailors. Now, you probably didn't get a chance to read their monster tag, but they're classified as an undead and a ghost, so it's kind of important to go over the special enemy resists in this game, because they were changed in Anniversary Edition. So if you encounter an enemy that's a ghost, they have a 60% resistance towards physical damage and piercing damage. It's not a resistance, actually. It used to be a resistance. It's now an absorb. 60% absorb. That's even worse, because 1, you can't subtract it, and 2, absorb is very powerful. It's at the top of the damage order, so it's going to take your damage and just multiply by 0.4. That's what 60% damage absorb is going to do. Undead take it even further, so you have... I believe it's an 80% absorption to all poison damage. And I think they have an innate high absorb to bleed damage as well.
We've got trouble. The truth is...
That means if you
Sword and
encounter...
shield, not your style? I think you'll find what you're looking for here.
Yeah, thanks. So if you encounter someone that's both a ghost and undead, that means that that character is going to be highly resistant to a lot of different attacks. The end of that is that it's very likely those drowned sailors are going to be annoying to kill, and you're going to have to kill some a little bit later. We just picked up a quest, in fact, to kill a few of them on the next coast we encounter.
Welcome! A fine warrior like yourself. I'm sure I've got just what you're looking for.
So again, we're always on the lookout for regen gear.
Monsters are ramping. Everyone's talking about...
Hold the loose.
We're going to turn in these old quests from Sparta. We never did it. It's often more efficient if you wait to turn in certain quests, but just don't forget about them.
So you...
A little bit more about the regen gear.
I'm busy enough supplying the Spartans.
There's a higher tier, a tier 2 of it that you can find in Act 1 called, I think, Rejuvenation is the affix, the suffix name. But even within the Rejuvenation, or the Recovery, I'm sorry, you can roll between 2 and I think 3.5 for most pieces of gear. So even if you found a piece of recovery gear, be on the lookout for one with a higher roll or maybe more armor. It's always worth checking the vendor. You might also want to shop for some rings. Titan Quest, unlike a lot of other aRPGs, it's very, very difficult to cap out all of your resists at once. If you thought Grim Dawn was hard, it's 10 times harder in Titan Quest. You don't have the devotion system. You don't have all these other ways of progressing your character. It's a pretty low magic sort of game, so it's worth it to carry around swap rings. The swap rings you want to look for are going to be a fire resist ring and a cold resist ring. You don't need lightning resist until second half of Act 3, parts of Act 4. Generally, if you're going to walk away with anything this act, walk away with maybe a fire resist ring and a cold resist ring. We're not going to swap to any of them in this act. I'm going to actually try to farm Shadow Maw later on. I have some testing I want to do with him. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more on the fire resist side of things. He does fire and physical. Be careful of these Lemos. They drain your health. You don't have any resistance to it right now, and they're hard to kill otherwise. Lemos are never more powerful than they are in Act 1. So I'm going to set these 2 fire res rings off to the side, save them for later. You can tell they only have one affix on them. It's the fire resist affix. They don't have a suffix at all, so they can roll with health, they can roll with defensive ability. Generally on my swap rings, those are the 2 things I'm looking for. It doesn't really matter which one. I kind of prefer health in addition to the resist. But you have to assume that there's going to be other enemies around the guy, the spellcaster you're trying to fight or counter with the ring. So defensive ability will work too. Defensive ability is something that it's compared to offensive ability. So if an enemy attacks you with a melee attack, then it compares their offensive ability with your defensive ability. And that's what determines a graze, and it also determines, on the other end of the spectrum, a critical hit. That calculation is only used for melee, by the way. It's not used for spells, and it's not used for any ranged attacks. So you saw when I fought that mage before, I was trying to bait out his frost sort of attack. There's a lot of abilities in this game, a lot of abilities that are on sort of a cadence. That is to say that they have a cooldown, and the logic of the enemies in the game is to pretty much use their abilities right when they're off cooldown. That means you'll start to understand the cadence at which they use abilities, and a lot of those timers are pretty similar. We're going to use that sort of knowledge to counter the next boss pretty soon, Cyclops. And we're going to use it, you're going to hear me use the word cadence probably so many times it's going to make you sick. But it really is one of those points you want to hammer into this game, because that's very unlike other aRPGs too. Other aRPGs have more sophisticated logic behind when enemies use abilities. In this game, it's very easy to take advantage of the more simple logic and the ability cooldowns in order to bait out attacks. So in this guy's case, he does that Cyclops yell. You can see it slows you down, which is just awful, and it makes it harder to dodge that stun. So what you want to do is run around him. He shouts again. You go in for an attack. The ability you're trying to bait isn't that ground slam, because you can see he just spams it. It's that shout. The shout's the one on the cadence. So that's the one you bait out. So right now I'm feeling like he's going to use it pretty soon. There it is. Dodge the slam. Go back in. A lot of bosses are like this, and I mean a lot of bosses are like this. The next boss is like that too, for instance. So here's just a giant pile of items. We're looking for recovery. I'll also generally take rings. They're good to sell. They're effective, just like in Bethesda games where there's that rule where, what's the rule? It's like every pound of weight an item has, you want to be able to sell that item for 10, so it's 10 per pound. It's kind of like that in this game. Inventory space is precious, especially at the beginning of the game, so just take items that have very low inventory, but high amount of a high selling point. This is the second coast map in the game. You want to go due south once you enter it. Kill all those ghosts. Don't miss that quest. Again, you can choose to just skip this coast. I'm pretty strong. I deal a lot of elemental damage. That makes me good against these wraiths. And also these heavily armored turtles. Elemental damage does not care about armor. You can enter this cave here. There's a lot of turtles in it. I tend not to go off the beaten path, like I said. So I skip a lot of caves. If you see me enter a cave, there's usually a reason for it. And if you see me skip a region, that means there's not a quest there or anything particularly interesting in there either. Since I'm using Magical Charge, which relies on retaliate damage, you'll see I try to attack the archers directly. That way I can kill them while letting the melee guys kill themselves by hitting me. That's sort of the most effective way to play this. So here in Ambrosos, there's two things you need to watch out for. One, there's a quest you don't want to miss, just because it gives attribute points as the reward. And two, this is where you first start encountering centaur chieftains. They're the sort of white-brown. They're a little bit more white than the other ones. They can come in two forms. The one I just fought was a bit wimpy. They heal, that's about it. But they can also come in a very deadly form where they have two abilities. One is Battle Standard. The same Battle Standard as Warfare Mastery.
You see,
And the other is a Shout. I believe it's the same War Horn ability that's in the Warfare Mastery. And it reduces your health by a percentage, a large percentage. So you get this dude's bow by chasing Ino throughout this cave. If you have a nice ability like Squall that you can use at a distance, sometimes you can just use it on her right at the start of the cave. If you don't go close to her, she won't run deeper into the cave. In my case, and in most of your cases, you have to chase her into the center of the cave. If you have to do that, then just kill her adds, LOS around the pillars if you need to, and then save her for last. You can see that I let that huntress live, and that means I had her shooting me, and also her trap was shooting me as well. That's a little bit more dangerous. You're welcome, Chiron. So you can see you got 2 attribute points there. That's pretty good. You don't want to miss any of that kind of reward. Some rewards are better to skip than others, but I think there's only one quest in this entire game that I'm going to skip on this playthrough, and it's in Act 4.
Come, have a look. I might have something to suit your needs.
So I happened to find a lightning resist ring. I'll just throw it in my swap ring place, replace it as I find something better. But again, I'm not going to use the swap rings in Act 1. You can always vendor farm for them later. Like in Act 2, you can use Act 2 to vendor farm for your initial swap rings. But in addition to looking for recovery gear in Act 1, you want to start looking at those rings. What's especially valuable are defensive ability and health rings. But those are kind of hard to find. Again, kill any harpies you find. Now we got 2 quests from that village. One of them is to find a blacksmith. Now, when I started playing this game, I'd always forget to find him. He's hidden in the swamp. Not very well hidden, but he's hidden. You can see this is one of the elders that uses the battle standard and the war horn. The best way to stay safe with centaur elders is to identify that there's an elder there, and then to kind of slowly approach, see what he does, and react accordingly. If he's the warfare type of Centaur Elder, reacting accordingly means running away. You want to run, run, run. You don't want to fight enemies while they're in the effect of that banner. So this guy's grove is on fire. You just want to run to the end of it and fight the third boss. I'm not sure how these spiders started a fire or why they're just chilling around. That doesn't matter. So this boss is also on a cadence. Thought about getting a little bit more poison res, but you don't need poison res. Her hardest hitting ability is that poison ability there, and that's what you're trying to dodge. Right when it goes away, she's going to cast it again. So you can either wait for it to go away before you run away, or you can just use that internal sort of clock in your brain and just realize that that ability is on the same cadence as the Cyclops shout, for instance. You can easily get through that fight without taking any poison damage whatsoever. All you have to do is to bait the first one, and the rest of it's just cadence from there. I found this Wellspring Amulet. There's a lot of stats on it. Don't get too attached to stats on special pieces of gear. In this game, unlike Titan Quest, you can't put charms or relics or any item upgrades into a blue or legendary item, which is purple. So that devalues them a bit, but also the only thing I cared about on that necklace was the 6% elemental resistance. And if that's all you care about, that's not really the greatest necklace in the world, is it? So I'll be replacing that pretty quick in Act 2. So again, you move out of the range of that banner. You anticipate they're going to drop it, and they will. Don't go in thinking you're going to kill him before he drops it, because he'll stun you and then he'll drop it, then you're in big trouble. So the very first resurrection shrine you encounter in the Phocian Swamps, that's the one where you're going to want to farm Shadow Maul, if you want to farm him at all. So I'm going to put on my fire res rings like I just did. Get a little bit more defenses using my saved up attributes. I tend to save attributes, by the way, just to equip gear if I find it. And he's at the end of this cave. There's a couple things about this cave. One, Shadow Maul's not always home. And two, it's a mixture of spiders and demons, but it's always worth farming if you're really looking for demon's blood. I think this is the best place to farm it, regardless of whether Shadow Maw's home. As you can see, he's not home. But regardless of that, I mean, if you really want a full, complete Demon's Blood charm before you reach Athens, this is the place to do it. It took me a while to get this guy to spawn. You have to utilize a technique called game seeding. We'll talk about game seeding here in a bit, but the gist of it is that certain enemies, like Shadow Maw, they're either there or they're not, and you can't just start a new game from the main menu to determine whether he's there. It's dependent on the initial game seed, which is determined when you first start the Titan Quest executable. Now, this guy is enormously strong. So I'm going to use that boar technique from the very beginning of the video to try not to get hit and just run away. As you can see, I'm getting dealt a lot more damage in physical than I am in fire. But I managed to scrape by. If he hit me 2 or 3 times in a row, I think I'd get killed. So what I learned from that is I don't think this guy is worth farming unless you have a very powerful inheritance character. But he tends to always drop a charm. It's either Lupin Claw or Demon's Blood. You can see this time I didn't have to exit the game completely. Once he spawns, once you have that seed, then you can continue to farm him every new game. He'll always be there. So some farming spots work this way where you have to utilize game seeding, and we'll utilize game seeding later this video, end of Act 1 for Stonebinder's Cuffs. So he'll either drop Lupin Claw, which is very good because of a quest in Act 5, a new quest for Ragnarok, or Demon's Blood. So this time I saw he was out of mana, so I decided I would trade with him for a little bit just to see if I can get some retaliate damage in. And you'll see what happens. And dead. So he's a bit of a tough one. I decided to go in and kill him to get revenge. I don't die again, spoiler alert. But I think I get a second Lupin Claw, which is fine. I'm just fine with that because you need 3 full charms in Act 5. It's kind of a ridiculous quest, to be honest. So you can see this guy also spawns ads. If he does that, you're going to have to stutter step. I mean, there's no way to survive otherwise. You can't just sit there, kill the ads while he's wailing on you, and he's a fast pupper. Unfortunately, right when I killed the ads, he summoned them again, so... You can see this time I'm not quite stutter stepping, I'm watching him. I'm not watching his ads at all. And when he closes on me, that's when I move away. I don't care if his ads are hitting me in the meantime. They're small fish. Dead. So you can see I got another Lupin Claw. I'm okay with that. I could have sworn there used to be a special chest when you killed this guy, but it looks like there isn't. Anyway, this cave, I concluded that was a successful test. It's a good cave if you want to farm Demon's Blood before the end of Act 1. There's a spot to farm it in Act 2. There's a place to farm it in Act 3. It's so enormously useful, and it's really required for the last boss of Act 3 if you want to have a smooth, deathless run of him. So people have really concentrated on developing farming spots. Everyone has their favorite. We'll talk more about game seeding in Act 2 and how it relates to farming. The only other time we're going to encounter it in Act 1 is another shrine farm or resurrection farm for Gorgons. In the Labyrinth, the Stonebinder Cuff farming spot in the Labyrinth is either going to be Gorgons, which you want, or it's going to be undead and demons, which can't drop Stonebinders. So in order to get it to spawn Gorgons, you have to redo the game seed. Don't forget this blacksmith. If you stay north on the swamps and you start to fight satyrs again, it means you're close. He's hiding behind the trees a little bit. He's a worthwhile vendor just because he sells a lot of rings. He always sells a lot of rings. That means you can usually find something good.
Yes?
As you can see off camera, I accumulated a bunch of junk, including that blue shield, the kind of sun-looking shield. Jagged Hoplon. It's okay. I'm not going to use it. Always on a lookout for recovery gear. It doesn't look like there's anything good for swap rings. I mean, dexterity's okay. It gives you point for point 1 defensive ability. I would definitely prefer to have defensive ability instead of dexterity.
Goodbye now.
So why a dragon hunter? Well, I decided to play this character because if you're just coming back to the game and you don't have any gear to inherit, I think this is a very good starter character. The reason for that is it's simple to play. It's only slightly more difficult to build than a Conqueror just because of the way elemental damage works and scales. And the fact that scaling elemental means you can't wear all the strength gear. That's okay, you can just vendor shop for intelligence gear. But also because it gives more stats native to its mastery trees than any other mastery combination in the game. You get Herbal Remedy, which in normal mode, with just 6 points, gives you 80% poison res, so that's capped poison res for normal mode. And you get my number 2 ability down there. I forget what it's called, but it gives you bleed res and vitality res. Vitality res is enormously important. So because of that, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the gear you're looking for. You also have defensive ability kind of covered. Even though you're scaling intellect as an end goal, you get wood lore, and wood lore gives an enormous amount of defensive ability. Just as a frame of reference, I think the 6 out of 6 gives 200-300 of it. An end game character in legendary mode will have somewhere around 1,000. The best god builds out there back in the day had like 2,000.
Seeker.
In Delphi, don't forget to grab that quest, the Grieving Widow. It's kind of on the south part of town. Easy to miss.
I sell to the wise and powerful. Are you sure you should be shopping here?
Yes, I should be shopping here. So you're going to want to start looking for these arcanists rather than the blacksmiths. You'll find at this point in the game you're not going to have enough strength to keep up with the blacksmith's items. So you pretty much shop exclusively at the arcanist, which is fine because the arcanist is the one that sells rings anyway. So I run through this area. The density isn't good enough for experience. I don't need any items from these dudes. So I just tend to go right into this cave. So you can get turned around in the Parnassus Caves a little bit. In general, I would say as long as you're fighting spiders, then you're going the right way. Up until the point where you start fighting demons, but if you fight rat men, for instance, then you're off the beaten path. So once you go through this little alleyway, head north, straight north, all the way to the most northern part of the cave. That's where we resolve the Grieving Widow quest. He's in this sort of torched area. He's a little mini-boss. He's a quest monster also. I believe he drops a monster infrequent. I've never farmed him. It's not really worth talking about what he does. You can also find a Deathweaver leg tip in here. So if you're really struggling to find a decent melee weapon, your melee weapon's really bad, it might be worth killing some of these more than you normally would, the Deathweavers. Limos start coming in packs of 2. Just focus fire one at a time. They're very deadly. I find that the Orthis, those fire doggos, and the Limos give much better drop rates for Demon's Blood than the Yuris. The Yuris are just awful. Also, don't ignore the bats. Bats give Bat Fang, believe it or not, as a charm. And that combined with Achilles Relic, and I think the Poison Charm, the Poison Sac or the Venom Sac, those are the required recipe items for what's, in my opinion, the best early game artifact in the game. An artifact is the thing you equip on your bottom left slot. And that one is it's kind of an edgy name. I think it's Shroud of Eternal Night or something like that. That boss that I just ran by, you're going to want to follow what I just did exactly. She's the most annoying boss ever. I'm sure you know exactly what I mean if you've played Anniversary Edition, but she just spams this mana reduction, buff stripping thing. So, I mean, if you rely on buffs, it's just like, you know, have a nice day. I mean, there's no way to get around it. Just skip her, run past the bridge, get the waypoint, move on. So I found I was pretty okay on the offense department. And by the way, these fat pigos, you're going to want to kill them wherever you see them. They're pretty decent in terms of experience yield. So if you're going to kill anything in Parnassus, mop up the camps with lots of those fat guys. So I felt like I was okay in the offense department, so I'm putting more points into Herbal Remedy for flat health regen, and I'm putting more points into defensive ability via Wood Lore, which also gives attack speed. In general, in this game, attack speed is king. By the way, they kind of fixed this cave. The transition used to be awful in terms of lag. It also makes the glitch, I believe, impossible now to get endless skill points. This game relies on the old school formula. Like I said, it's a pretty low magic game. There's not a lot of crazy scaling. If you have attack speed, flat damage, and procs, you're going to do enormous damage. And if you're leveling as a rune master, I don't care how good of a slow mace or spear you find, use a very fast weapon, the fastest weapon you can get. I would say the only caveat to that is if you're already capped on your attack speed, or if you find an overpowered throwing weapon. Now, a lot of throwing weapons in this game are very overpowered, enormously overpowered. And a lot of other Ragnarok-specific items are overpowered as well. But I found overwhelmingly amongst the unique throwing weapons that I've encountered, they've all been very, very overpowered. Crazy affixes, crazy numbers, ridiculous. So this is the Gorgon boss. It's the first hard boss in the game. You can cheese her. Watch what I do. You get Uriel at the top part of your screen. You lure her down here by herself. And you kill her. If she runs away, don't follow her, just bait her back. She's annoying because she heals the other two. So you want to get rid of her first. At this point, you can run in there and engage, or you can lure Medusa. I've done this several times, so I've gotten pretty good at luring them one by one. By the way, if X max is your jam, then you can also lure 2 Uriels instead of all 3, which is bearable. So you can use this strategy on X max. They made it harder in Anniversary to do this technique, but obviously it's still doable. And last is Cetheno. And she's dead. I don't farm these. You can farm them for Stonebinder's Cuffs if you want. So this is Feyon. I'm not sure what her point in the lore is.
I can't believe I let those Gorgons get the better of me.
But whenever we encounter her, she's failing at whatever it is she's trying to do. So we'll find her failing more and more throughout the game. You can see this green sort of Gorgon, the Profaner. They can drop Stonebinder's Cuffs, and so can the red version, which is a Geomancer. Those are the mobs we're going to be farming. So you can farm, here's a Geomancer. You can farm the Gorgon Queens for Stonebinder's Cuffs. They do drop it. But I'm firmly in the camp of people that claim that the Labyrinth is the better place to farm them. And they're so good that, really, I farm them every single playthrough.
Hello.
But even if you've not gotten to the Labyrinth yet, it's sometimes worth going out of your way to kill those Profaners and Geomancers. You can see here I'm practicing what I preached. I kind of screwed up with my stats and can't use it right now.
Shop again.
Not unless I have my buff active anyway. But I'm getting a very fast throwing weapon. You can see I'm punching these guys. I started to realize exactly where I went wrong with my strength there, so I'm going to have to correct this issue. I kind of went panic mode and put an extra point into hunting. Decided I don't want to ruin my build, and there we go, we fixed it. One other thing about this build, the Dragon Hunter, in my own testing, which is kind of inconclusive to be honest, I don't believe, I'm not convinced that elemental damage can crit, elemental melee damage. If you didn't know, this game, unlike Grim Dawn, ranged attacks cannot crit no matter what. In fact, they're not influenced by offensive ability at all, which is kind of weird since you can find offensive ability as an affix on ranged weapons still. It does nothing, except for waste an affix slot. But I tested using a character editor by giving myself tons of intellect and then toggling between 0 and 600 offensive ability with a melee weapon. And I didn't utilize the tool that displays crits. That's been an unreliable tool in the past, by the way. I wouldn't trust the sheet damage, and I wouldn't trust the crit numbers on that option if you're trying to determine whether, you know, this or that is better for your build. So I went with the old school attack a turtle, see how many times it takes to hit the turtle before he's dead by counting. and then toggle your change and recount. And I did a lot of testing on this. It's inconclusive in a sense that we don't have a lot of tools, so it's hard to get an exact sense. You know, like I'm 100% sure elemental can't crit, but I'm like 80% sure that elemental damage, even melee elemental damage, cannot crit. Pierce damage, by the way, can crit, so don't worry about that. Of course, physical damage can crit. This guy's stupidly overpowered. If you're in this spot that I'm showing you, you can throw a Squall here if you have Squall. He has a very, very short leash, so he doesn't run out of his area. You can kill him. I was thinking about skipping him, but God hates a coward and all that. So he's got two things you need to watch out for. You want to bait his poison bomb, and then you want to go and start attacking. Feel free to run away if you're, you know, at 50% health and your potion's on cooldown. What you don't want to have happen is to charge in there, have him toss his bomb right on top of where you want to fight him, and then he leeches from you and he auto-attacks. You can see my resists were pretty good, but he was still just chunking me down. He does mostly Vitality. Vitality is what heals him, by the way. Any Life Leech looking ability, at least since Anniversary Edition, is governed by Vitality resist. There might still be, I think Typhon might have a part of his damage that's Life Leech resistance. It still exists in the game. It's no longer a part of Vitality, but it's Vitality that determines the effect of that Life Leech. At least from Lemos and Typhon for the most part, and most other creatures who leech life from you. Vitality also dictates the effect of the percent health reduced sort of modifier. It just takes a flat amount of percent health away from you. That's also governed by Vitality damage, even on something that you wouldn't think it would be, like on Warhorn. So Athens is pretty sure, it's a pretty dangerous place. The leading causes of death in ancient Greece, if you're curious, were childbirth, malaria, venereal disease, definitely alcoholism, and centaur chieftains. So just like in history, we want to make sure that when we encounter a centaur chieftain that we're not being too gung-ho. I mean, it's easy if you're leveling as Ring of Fire to just farm a bunch of enemies together and let your passive damage kill them all. Well, if you farm a bunch of dudes together and you get this piercing, or this, what is it called, flush out debuff, and then you get stunned, you're just dead. Likewise, if you're using Squall and you've just breezed through this act so far, you'll launch a Squall. Squall won't kill everything in the pack you used it against, but you're like, oh, no problem. I'll just bring that pack to the second pack and then use another Squall. Well, then you've just set yourself up to be stunned and bannered again and killed. So this is the first dangerous part of the game where overpowered builds, even inheritance builds, can find themselves getting killed. So you really have to make sure that you're looking out for the Centaur Elder spawns. You want to make sure that you're not dragging too many extra mobs, that you've killed those trappers who do the flush out debuff. All these things come together. You want to pay attention when you're here in Athens. You kind of have to walk through the alleyways in order to progress. You can't just go as the crow flies from the base up to the door of Athens. I will say that if you're fighting undead at all in this area, then you've gone off the beaten path. So there's Leonidas.
Once I sell everything I've got, I'm setting sail for some island that's never seen a monster. Milos or Icaria.
This dungeon isn't too hard. It's, I think, a 5-floor dungeon in the Athens Acropolis. It's a pretty short area. But some people have trouble with the last boss. Now, he's tagged as a ghost. So if you're dealing physical damage, which most characters, if you're not a Rune Master, are dealing physical damage, he's going to take a long time to kill, so you really want to stock up on your potions. again, I don't want to not turn in quests I've done before, so make sure you're looking at your quest log periodically. So that should do it. This character deals elemental damage, so I'm not going to have any problem with the Athens boss whatsoever. And he's not so much deadly as it just takes a long time to kill him. He summons ads, so very worst case for you is if you're leveling, I don't know, defense mastery, and you opted not to level with shatter, which, I mean, if defense is your best bet for leveling, let's say you're, I don't know, defense spirit or something. Spirit doesn't have anything for leveling. You want to level with shield. I think it's called batter or shield slam, something like that. Just assign it to your left click. But worst case, you're a character like that, you know, and you don't have the upgrade to batter yet, so you're just dealing single target damage. That's when this boss might give you some trouble, because it just takes forever to kill him, and you can kind of get overwhelmed by the ads. That's not exactly true, though, since most bosses who summon multiple ads, let's say they summon 3 skeleton mages. If you kill 2 of those 3 skeleton mages and leave the last one alive, the boss won't re-summon them. For the most part, that's how it works. So you can utilize that. Just if you're a single target character, just kill 2 out of the 3 skeleton mages. I think this guy summons 3 of them. And just kind of move the boss away a little bit and leave that guy there. That way at least he can't summon 3 at a time if there's also the melee skeletons that he summons. And you could get, I don't know, gibbed by a lot of damage. This area is a little bit glitchy. They still haven't perfected zone transitions, especially with stairs, but it's gotten a lot better. I kind of just, I don't know. I'm pretty casual about this place. I don't full clear. I just want to get it done. I'll go for chests. If there's a lot of melee guys tailing me, I'll kill them. Sepulchers are usually worth tagging. They give a lot of loot, they give a lot of money. But I don't obsess over them. I don't explore every crypt or whatever. So here's the boss, Alistair. Notice he's using Death Chill Aura. Now that aura is not too bad on normal mode. I'm going to speed it up here. But on Epic and Legendary, it really slows your attack speed. And that makes this fight just annoying and long. You can see he's an undead ghost. That's just the worst. But like I expected, this character didn't have any problem.
Mysterious war.
The other enemy type that you should look out for is Construct and Device. Those ones, I mean, you expect a machine would be pretty much immune to poison, you know. Same thing with bleeding. But they're not fully immune, I don't think. There's a couple more Gorgons here, but you're looking just to take the boat to Knossos. And Phaon is waiting for us at the docks. Phaedra sent me.
Phaedra sent you?
Yep. Jealous? So Knossos is the last sort of area in this act.
Welcomes.
Once.
It's about time. This is a long one. I'm hoping to get this video out less than an
The
hour
beasts have
long.
claws and teeth, but you have fire. You have Zeus-like bolts to throw, and I have things to sell you.
So I'm going to show off the difference between a monster infrequent and a green. That's a normal green text. That's monster infrequent. It's a slightly off green color. Now, that distinction is important. Green items, in general, have their own affix pool. It's separate from yellow items. The affixes can be much better than the yellow items. Monster infrequents, they can pull from the pool of the green affixes and the yellow affixes. But it won't show, it won't append as part of their name. So, you know, if you find a green item, it could be like alleviating, well, that's a bad example. Let's just say crude buckler of the glade. So it's got the glade of the glade affix.
Safe travels.
And it shows that in the name. It's Crude Buckler of the Glade. Well, if I found a pair of Stonebinder's Cuffs, which are a monster infrequent, even if they had an affix like that, I don't believe Stonebinder's Cuffs can roll of the Glade. I'm not 100% sure. It won't show as a part of their name. But they can still roll the affix, so if you look at the item tooltip, you'll clearly see that those attributes are there. So Stonebinders, they have +1 skills and elemental resists. They always have them. Every single pair of Stonebinder's Cuffs is going to have Ele res and +1 skills. Don't forget this quest down here, by the way, with this healer.
Yes.
After you pass the second rock ridge. But you can roll, let's say, plus armor on your Stonebinder's Cuffs. Those are technically sturdy Stonebinder's Cuffs, but they won't actually be named that. They'll just be called Stonebinder's Cuffs. What makes them strong is they have the extra affixes on top of their prefix and suffix that they can possibly roll. Plus, you can put a charm or a relic in them, just like any other green item. So if you're doing a playthrough where you're not inheriting, you should probably look for some good monster infrequents, where they drop, how to farm them, and you should target farm them. You're going to get a lot of mileage out of monster infrequents in this game. More so, I would say, than in Grim Dawn. Mostly because in Grim Dawn there's a lot of good epic and legendary items and you can upgrade them. In this game you can't. So a lot of the best items in the game are a well-rolled monster infrequent. So right next to the healer quest is the quest we got in town. The only thing worth mentioning about this boss is that he has Onslaught. Any monster with Onslaught in this game, which is the warfare ability, is deadly. They deal a ton of damage. If you just sit there and trade with them, it's unlikely that you'll be able to stay alive for very long. But all you have to do, it works on charges, so you'll see this little line below his feet, and it increases slowly. You just have to break away and let them diminish, like I just did there. That's all you have to do. So if you're taking too much damage, just run away. There's a lot of very deadly monsters with Onslaught later on. The Blood Drinkers in Act 4, the Insectoid Captains in Act 4, the last boss of this act, or second to last boss, Minotaur, he has Onslaught. You always have to treat them all the same way. Just don't start trading with them if they have an already full Onslaught meter, because you'll die. You can see there's a decent amount of harpies on the way to the labyrinth. That makes this a decent spot, I guess, for farming pristine plumage. I don't recommend it because it involves a lot of running, and there's these annoying maenads.
Good day.
That's a pretty decent... You can see that rolled the recovery, but it also has the hardened affix. I guess I decided I didn't want it because I didn't like the recovery roll. But this guy is your last stop before the labyrinth, so if you need to stock up on potions, and especially if you plan on farming Stonebinder's Cuffs, just get like 100 potions. You don't know how long it's going to take you to get those. My average is about 40, maybe 60 runs. That doesn't even guarantee it's going to roll well. For some reason, I always seem to get the hardy prefix and no suffix, so that's just Stonebinder's Cuffs with +10 armor or something, you know. That's just about the worst thing I could imagine. I don't care about +10 armor. The way armor works, just a quick thing, is that it's specific to the gear slot. So if you take a hit, then there's a chance it's going to hit your torso, there's a chance it's going to hit your arms, your legs, your helmet, whatever. And it uses, once it determines where it hit, it uses the native armor on that slot. So if you had a chest piece and it hit your torso, it would use your torso armor in order to to counter the physical damage of that with armor. So it wouldn't use your combined armor like an MMORPG or something like that. It doesn't work that way. But if you find armor on, say, a piece of jewelry or something like that, it comes from elsewhere, then that applies blanket over every single piece of armor you have. And it doesn't split it or anything like that. It provides its full absolute value to every single slot you have. So armor found on rings or not tied to a weapon, they can be good, but for the most part, I don't really care about armor, mostly because it comes in such small amounts. Like plus 10 armor on something that has 38 armor, I mean, that's really not worth the affix, I think. So if you're listening along, we're in the labyrinth now. If you're watching along, you'll see an effective-ish way to clear through it. I never found that watching someone run through the labyrinth really helps. You just have to kind of do it. You're not really helped nowadays by the new map. The map is pretty decent on the first half of the labyrinth. It was really bad when they first came out with Anniversary Edition. I don't know if they're trying to be cheeky and they made the map bad purposely because, you know, this is supposed to be a maze. But I don't think that's the case, because it seems as patches have come out, they've tried to make this a little bit more readable. But unfortunately, it's still incomplete towards the later parts. There's a lot of inaccuracies. And again, I don't know if those subtle inaccuracies are on purpose or what. But just know that, I mean, if you're looking right now, it's pretty close-ish. It's not showing the sidewalls, but later on that's not always the case. So if you intend to farm Stonebinder's Cuffs in here, just know that it's towards the end, the farming spot. If you treat the maze as a set of blocks with a bunch of mazes in the blocks, it's the second to last block. So the maze really is just a set of squares with little mazy parts, lots of walls in each square, and each square transition is like a little tiny hallway thing. And I'll point it out, of course. It's another one of those things where it almost isn't helpful to watch somebody make it to the farm. You have to kind of figure out what resurrection shrine it is yourself, and it's not helped again by the fact that sometimes there's not even gorgons there. It could be undead and demons. It's also not helped by the fact that it's a reverse farm, so you encounter the shrine and then the farm is from the shrine in reverse a little bit of a ways, so that could be jarring if you're trying to watch the video and determine where the farm spot is. But hopefully everything I've said in combination with each other will help you find it. And by the way, it's right here. There you go. You're an expert now. Luckily for me, it's Gorgons. That means I don't have to reset the seed. So this is both a shrine farm, in a sense that I need to get a resurrection shrine, and as long as I intend to do this farm, I can't get the resurrection shrine after this. I have to do it at this shrine. But it's also a seed farm, in a sense that if you get the wrong seed and you have undead and you have demons here, you actually have to exit out of the entire game. It's not enough to make a new game. You have to reset the executable. So I'll show you what this farm looks like once, and then I'm going to make a cut because it's going to take a while to actually farm it. But in general, you want to buff up, and I think I'm taking a water break here. You want to go backwards and immediately kind of walk past these guys a little bit. You don't want to aggro too many of the automatoi up at the top. And don't worry about skipping, these guys will follow you. This is a very short farm, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. But make sure you're keeping an eye on the corpses, just in case there's a late showing of the items that drop. Sometimes the physics engine can make the items a little bit janky. When they drop, they won't appear. The names won't appear for a little while. And that's all there is to it. Try to get this run done very quickly. and do it about 40 times. You should get it done in a half hour on average, maybe a little less if you've really optimized it. And that's all there is to it. So hopefully this will take me about 30 minutes, and I'll see you guys a little later. No, so that only took about 20 minutes for me. This is, I think, attempt 20. The attempt which I find the Stonebinder's cuffs. There they are. Once I get them, I'm ready to move on. I got the worst ones, the ones I was afraid I was gonna get. Sturdy Stonebinder cuffs. But that's okay. On normal mode, I'm not too obsessively crazy. You can see here I'm comparing a green item versus Stonebinder's cuffs. That helmet actually has a really nice suffix on it, or was it a prefix? The stately affix is very good, and that's what I was saying about those green items. They have their own pool to pull from. Yellow items can't roll stately. So green items are still worth looking for and vendor farming for. Like I said, if you're playing a Rune Master, it's very likely that you're scaling intellect. And because of that, you're going to have to vendor farm for a lot of your gear. Unfortunately, this game just drops a highly disproportionate amount of strength gear instead of intelligence or especially dexterity gear. These are skeletal darts. They're a monster infrequent throwing weapon. And they're really good. You can see 10% chance of 45% reduced health. And some flat damage on a fast base. I mean, you can see why I say throwing weapons were sort of made in their own secret lab somewhere. I mean, they're all very, very overpowered. So this Minotaur boss, he's only got two things you need to worry about. One of them is a stun ability that's on a cadence, and the other one is onslaught. So you counter him by baiting out the stun. You can be cheeky and destroy these traps. I didn't get lucky. The stun's kind of hard to see. There it is. He slams the ground. Once he does that, you can fight, as long as you're confident in his onslaught charges. So he's not any more complicated than Cyclops, really. This character's very strong, so I mean, he just deflated instantly. But likely he's going to be a longer fight. And you just have to bait out that stun. Sometimes he does the stun twice in a row. That can be deadly. This Telkeen, on the other hand, very easy fight. Again, these guys are constructs, so they might take a while to kill. But they don't do anything other than hit you. And this guy only has one ability to look out for, and it's only really dangerous on Legendary, and that's his summoning. There it is, he summons two Lemos. If you're too slow on killing them, he's going to absorb their life, and he'll heal for a lot. So that creates kind of a damage check on Legendary. I've had a Conqueror, I think, who struggled with that a little bit. But that's it for this run. So I'll see you guys on Act 2, which is definitely the hardest act in the game, absolutely. So stick around for my tips there.